Implementing a pro runner's diet into your training routine can take your running to the next level. It really sounds like a daunting task, but it's a game changer that can really elevate your abilities and improve your overall well-being. Today, we're going to be breaking down the key components to a pro runner's diet and showing you how you can implement it in your running so that you can take it to the next level. By implementing the strategies of elite runners, you will be well on your way to improving your running and being a better athlete. So let's dive in and see how Ann uses nutrition to help improve her running performance. Ann, tell us a little bit about your nutrition journey and how did you figure out what was right and works for you?
So a lot of my nutrition is really based on trial and error. I think I've tried a million different things in a million different ways. But my mom always said a little bit of what you fancy does you the world of good. So I've tried not to be too drastic in my approach to nutrition. I tried to be more well-rounded, but by following some general principles that kind of keep me on the straight and narrow.
So you say you figured it out through trial and error. Maybe let's start off with some of the mistakes that you made in your nutrition and how that put you in a place where you now feel like you give your body what it needs.
So I think anything too extreme is a negative. So any diet that limits, for example, carbohydrate intake, or something that fuels primarily with fats or primarily with protein, I think is a mistake. I think that you've got to incorporate all the nutrients and you've got to make sure that your diet is really varied. And when I didn't include enough carbohydrates, I pushed myself into a state of calorie deficit, which became chronic, and I then got red S. And when I had too much protein and wasn't relying on other sources of income, I had similar negative effects, like my hair was falling out, my skin was very dry, and overall my performance suffered. So while I think you can sustain a restrictive diet, whether it's protein or fat or carbohydrate, up to a maximum period of about 18 months. Anything longer than that is really going to affect your performance.
Cool. So I think really my takeaway from that is that you have to understand where things fit into your nutrition so that you can know what your body needs. And I suppose it's fairly topical now for people to restrict carbohydrates so that they can lose weight or maintain a low body weight. And I think once we understand that anything beyond moderate intensity exercise really has a fairly high demand for carbohydrates as part of the energy supply chain, and that carbohydrates have a very low store in the human body. That is why restricting carbohydrates in your diet compromises you. Now, we call it burning fats in a carbohydrate flame. So burning small amounts of carbohydrates leads to burning large amounts of fats, and then as the intensity of exercise intensity increases, you then demand more carbohydrates to burn. In the absence of those carbohydrates, your body will actually then turn to breaking down proteins because it can get the same little carboxyl group that it needs to get from carbohydrates from proteins. And you start to get muscle breakdown, which ultimately is what then leads you slowly but surely to health compromise when you have restrictive diets or diets that rely too heavily on a specific carbohydrate source. And are there any tricks or anything that you use to try and manage your day to make sure that you get the right nutrients in at the right time?
So I have a big focus on recovery nutrition. I feel like that's often neglected by a lot of athletes. So after a training session, I make sure that I always have a carbohydrate protein mix. The easiest thing to have for that is a protein shake. But a high protein meal with carbohydrate is equally as efficient. So even if you're just having scrambled eggs on toasts, that would fulfill the same purpose. And the other real thing that I never ever skip is a pre-morning run or morning workout breakfast. Like I've got to have a snack as soon as I wake up in the morning. And that really is just to manage my cortisol levels. And I know a lot of athletes train fasted, but it's really not a good idea, particularly for women.
Yeah, look, that's a difficult one for us normal runners that have to juggle families and jobs, but there really is so much value in developing a routine that allows you to take in even a small amount of nutrients before you exercise. So in Ann's case, she's using a liquid meal post-exercise, and that often makes it much easier to get from training to other commitments. But when you're on race morning, when you've got to train early mornings, that is a fantastic way for you to get your calories in so that you don't go into exercise fasted, and starting your day badly is not the best way to sustain a really healthy diet. Now, we often forget that elite athletes are not robots. So Ann, how do you manage your cravings for the bad things? You said earlier, I can't remember how you phrased it, but the things that you desire are often the things that you need. We know that's not true about chocolates and cake, but you're human. How do you manage that intake in your diet?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes if I'm doing a lot of aerobic training, so a lot of easy running or particularly trail running, I mean, my need for sweet baked products is almost overwhelming. So I do have donuts, don't tell anyone, but I use that as my treat, but I won't have it more than once or twice a week. And I do try to limit things to definitely no more than 4 treats a week, but I'm not obsessive about it. You know, I figure if you want something, have it, but if you're fueling properly, you shouldn't have those cravings as frequently. Often, if you're eating properly, the sweet cravings are less problematic, especially if you're making sure you have enough good carbohydrate.
Yeah, and I think that's the key. I mean, often those real cravings for sweet things are in response to, in particular, low carbohydrates, but purely just not eating properly. Look, we all lead busy lives, so it's not always super easy, but I often also look at this as a problem between having lots of powders or eating whole foods. And absolutely, although it takes more planning, taking in whole foods and shopping in the whole food section of a shop rather than living on bars and powders and drinks definitely minimizes cravings. But I think the important thing is that we need to look at these things in moderation. And as long as you're not eating junk all the time and you're not getting cravings for junk all the time, then you're probably getting close to managing your diet as you should. A question, be honest, for our viewers: how difficult is it to be really strict with yourself all the time when you are training for a very important race?
So I don't find eating properly difficult because I really enjoy good, healthy, nutritious food, and I like the way that it makes me feel. I suffer a lot more with not having a glass of wine with the said healthy meal. But no, eating healthily, as long as you make an effort to make it tasty, isn't problematic for me.
Look, and I think that also boils down to habit. I think once you eat well and you're enjoying what you're eating, it makes it easier for you to make time to prepare the kind of meals that you look forward to, but that keep you healthy and keep the cravings at bay. And how do you fuel your training, so specifically your nutrition around specific training sessions, and importantly, how do you then link that into race day nutrition?
So taking enough carbohydrate during training has been a challenge for me. I've had to learn how to do it more effectively because I don't enjoy taking gels and sweet drinks during a training session. But I have learned what does work for me and what I can take without feeling too nauseated by the gels. But I tend to have a lot more sort of fruits and whole foods while I train, which I wouldn't be able to have during a race situation. When you're racing, I mean, it takes all my effort to breathe. I can't eat food at the same time. But I do make sure that I fuel properly before and after, and then I try to get in as much as I can during a session, but only if it's over an hour. I don't take things for short training sessions. And then for racing, I've experimented a lot too, and I can really only get in liquids, and that's also been a trial and error to make sure which liquid product can I take that has the highest calorie intake. And this year at Comrades, I got up to 100 grams carbs per hour, which is a huge whack of carbs. And, you know, I feel like I finally found the solution. But it takes time to practice what your gut can handle.
Yeah, look, that is so key. And that's why we always tell people to practice with what you're going to use for race day. Don't get caught in the weeds about what the best products are, because the best product is the product that works for you. And it is highly trainable. In theory, what we're supposed to try and strive for is taking 1 gram of carbohydrate for every kilogram of body weight. So if we take an average size male of around 70 to 75 kilograms, that is 75 grams of carbohydrates an hour is an enormous amount. So if you take someone like Ann at 100 grams of carbohydrates an hour, that really is impressive, and cyclists often get to that numbers, runners don't. But the gut is highly trainable. So the first step is to find products that you can easily take while you are running hard and struggling to breathe. And then secondly, to slowly train yourself up to be able to take the amount of carbohydrates that you need as an individual. And a last takeaway for athletes that really want to improve their nutrition to help improve their running. What's the best tip you can leave them with?
I think not to try any fad diets. I don't think that there's one diet for a particular person, but I also don't think that extreme diets are the solution for anybody. And I guess the second thing I would say is just stick to wholesome whole foods. Try not to experiment too much with very processed, super gimmicky things. Just keep it natural as much as you can, and yeah, just work it out.
Yeah, we did talk a little bit earlier on about how knowing what nutrients are for can really help you to make the right decisions. So we touched on carbohydrates, but we didn't really talk too much about proteins and fats. And I think the important thing to understand about proteins is that they really are your critical building blocks for repairing the damage that you do during training. And in repairing that damage and then improving on your system or strengthening your muscles, that is part of the process on how we get better and stronger and faster. Taking in a really good quality fats and healthy fats is also so important in maintaining your hormonal levels, maintaining membranes, and ensuring optimal functioning of your physiology. And so that is why we really want to steer away from fad diets or diets that hone in too narrowly on a specific nutrient. We need the carbohydrates for the energy. We don't have big stores of carbohydrates. We do need fats to maintain the integrity of the system, hormonal control, and the control of recovery. And of course, we have to fuel protein so that we can repair muscle. Proteins, muscle is the only storage house for proteins. Carbohydrates, small stores within the muscles. Fats, we've got plenty of stores, so shortages in fat take a long time to come out, but that doesn't mean that we want to restrict them in the short term. So doing things right for a few days is all good and well, but the real trick lies in being consistent and doing them over the long term. There are also 8 silly mistakes that you are probably making that are stopping you from running faster. So go and check out this video next so that you can run to the best of your ability.